The world is very weird right now, and thus, I have been reading very weird books. In my last video, we reviewed Kash Patel's children's book, The Plot Against the King, which many of you in the comments very kindly informed me is actually a trilogy. So guess what we're gonna be doing next week for Halloween? What could be scarier than Kash Patel writing a children's book? The answer is Kash Patel writing 3 children's books, which he did. And then in November, as promised, I will be finally reviewing Empress Teresa. That review is taking me for damn ever because that book is so long and every single page manages to have more off-the-wall, unhinged writing than the previous page, and it's like 400 pages of non-stop insanity, and then on top of that there's the whole story of the author and his wild behavior on God's green internet. So today we're going to be reviewing a book that I finished reading about 2 weeks ago, a book that I need to talk about, a book that has been getting a lot of buzz because of, once again, how absolutely unhinged it is, and that book is the 2025 memoir All the Way to the River, or as I'm calling it, the absolutely unhinged sequel to Eat, Pray, Love, because this book was written by Elizabeth Gilbert, who is most famous for having written Eat, Pray, Love, and then being played by Julia Roberts in a movie that I probably saw in high school, but I kind of forget the movie, it was pretty forgettable. It's like, oh, you read Eat, Pray, Love 20 years ago, well, get ready for the sequel, Cheat, Gay, Drugs. Which is what this book is about. It's about Elizabeth Gilbert cheating on her husband with a woman, being gay, and doing lots of drugs, and then trying to murder her girlfriend, who's both a heroin addict and also dying of cancer. Dude, she missed out on the perfect opportunity. She called her previous book Eat, Pray, Love, right? Okay? She absolutely could have named this book Fuck, Marry, Kill. It actually would have been the perfect title for it, and at least it would have been clever. Like, at least she would have put a little bit of wittiness to this insanity. Instead, we get this symbolic-ass title, All the Way to the River, which accomplished its goal of making it an Oprah's book club pick. After the MAGA-grifting midlife crisis scandals that became of both Dr. Phil and Dr. Oz, I'm not sure if I trust Oprah's selections on anything anymore, but I guess this book does have that honor of being an Oprah's book club pick. It is 2025, okay, and we bisexual women just can't catch a break. Our only representation in the girl boss grifter self-help sphere seems to be 2 people. First of all, Jenks and Chero, which if you haven't seen my review of The Straight Girl's Guide to Sleeping with Chicks, then you need to get ready for levels of internalized misogyny that I don't think Ben Shapiro's dehydrated wife could even fathom. And then we also, of course, have Elizabeth Gilbert, who is somehow exhibiting every single negative stereotype that both the straights and the gays try to pin on us, then makes up some new, secret, exciting, new negative bisexual stereotypes that we didn't even know existed. So today, we're going to dive into the story of how Elizabeth Gilbert made a metric fuckload of money off of Eat, Pray, Love, then spent 15 years falling in love with her hot female hairdresser while publicly pretending to be happy in the marriage she had to the guy that she met in Eat, Pray, Love, then emotionally cheating on her husband for like a decade by financially supporting her hot hairdresser, doing things like buying her huge gifts like entire houses, enabling her drug problems, and helping her lil nepotize her way into the publishing industry, then dumped her husband when she learned that her hot hairdresser was dying of cancer, then got burnt out on trying to care for her dying girlfriend, that she then tried to kill her, which her girlfriend learned about and was not mad about, but found hot and sexy and exciting and thrilling because she's actually a manic pixie dream lesbian. And then after her girlfriend dies, Elizabeth finds God, who is the only one who can truly save her from herself. Elizabeth Gilbert is a very interesting author to examine because you could easily point to her as one of the main forces that clearly kicked off the girl boss memoir self-help hybrid combo style that became so popular in the 2000s and the 2010s. Eat, Pray, Love was first published at the start of 2006, which is now approaching 20 years ago. And I would argue that Eat, Pray, Love is one of the books, if not the book, that kicked off this whole trend of toxic self-help books about how women should seek empowerment through being just as awful as men because true equality comes from bowing down to capitalism just as hard and making big money to beat men at their own game that way, and then cloaking it in this veneer of spirituality to frame the girl boss grifter as something empowering. It's very much a product of its time, and without books like Eat, Pray, Love, I'm not sure we'd ever have much worse books like You Are a Badass or Girl Wash Your Face or anything from that strained girl boss renaissance which seemed to start right after 9/11 and ended during the COVID pandemic. Funnily enough, The Straight Girl's Guide to Sleeping with Chicks came out a few months before Eat, Pray, Love, so that's what we were all dealing with 20 years ago, ladies. 20 years ago, I was just trying to deal with being in 7th grade, seeing if I could be allowed to wear my Vote for Pedro t-shirt to school picture day. But by and large, that style of girl boss worship really seemed to disintegrate during the COVID lockdowns of 2020, when more and more people came face to face with the reality that we have so little control over our own lives, and that most of us really are all just fucked by the same system in the exact same way, and that these self-help gurus are just taking advantage of that to capitalize on all of us. So it's really weird that Elizabeth takes that exact same tone and approach in her new book, an approach that's been outdated for half a decade at this point, an approach that now rings hollow as the world continues to fuck women over beyond our control, no matter how hard we suck the big dick of capitalism. This book should serve as a funeral for the self-help industry. This book exposes how absolutely unqualified every single self-help author is to be giving the advice that they're giving, how much they are not qualified to be coaching people, and this book should make you question ever trusting this type of author ever again. But as a memoir, like, if you take all the self-help stuff out and look at it solely as a memoir, the writing's kind of good. Like, there's some value there, I guess. So does that sound like a lot? Does that sound like a wild ride? Well, it is, but I think I'm equipped to handle it. You know why? Because I am the mirror universe counterpart of Elizabeth Gilbert. In order to take down Elizabeth Gilbert, the only one to face her can be another queer, mentally ill, recovering girl boss who loves doing drugs and losing myself in dramatic ass writing. Elizabeth needs to hear from someone who's been there, and bitch, I've been there. Let's go!
Get you some nuts.
Yeah, you effing.
Up yours, woke moralist. We'll see who cancels who.
Hey everyone, my name is Savvy. Welcome back to my channel, Savvy Writes Books. On this channel, we do book reviews, media analysis, discussions of what's going on in the book world and publishing industry and things like that. So if that is anything that you're interested in, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel and don't forget to ring the notification bell, because every week or two I put out new videos about those type of topics. Now, before we get into the details of this book review, I want to give a huge thank you to all of my Patreon supporters. Patreon supporters' names are up on the screen, and if you check my description below, you will see my $5 a month and up Patreon supporters who have the option to link their own stuff in my description below. So go check out those links. People are linking their own Etsy shops where they make their own art. People are linking their own books that they've written, their own handmade crafts, their own social causes that they care about. It's awesome. So definitely check that out. Also, if you like this little Chicago themed bracelet I'm wearing, then stay tuned. I have an update on all of the protest art fundraisers that I've been doing at the end of this video. When I read the book that we're going to be reviewing today, I read it the way that I often read books when I'm super busy. I buy the physical copy, but then I also get the audiobook version so that I can do some of the reading on the go. Lately, when I've been really busy making lots of stickers and lots of bracelets for my fundraiser, which I'm going to give you guys an update on at the end of the video, so stay tuned for that. You know, plus I've been making art, exercising, all of that, you name it. I like to be able to do my reading at the same time, which I did with the help of today's sponsor, Raycon. Today, I'm also going to be telling you about Raycon's Essential Open Earbuds. Overall, I just love having that ability to multitask because I've got a lot going on right now, and I want to make sure that I'm still reading as many books as I possibly can, even if I have to be doing something else with my hands at that moment. Right now, Raycon is celebrating their anniversary, and they sent me their Essential Open Earbuds, which, to celebrate their anniversary, are currently 30% off. Raycon's Essential Open Earbuds keep your ears open while still delivering crystal clear sound. They sit just outside your ear canal, so you can stay tuned into whatever's happening around you without losing out on your music or podcast or audiobook quality. Their open ear design creates a lightweight, comfortable fit that allows you to clearly hear the things going on around you while also listening to your music or your audiobook or whatever else you like to listen to. I personally really appreciate that because I'm often using my earbuds while I'm on long walks in the city, and I like to stay tuned in to what's going on around me while I'm also listening and paying attention to the audiobook that I'm currently enjoying. If you're interested in trying Raycon's open earbuds and getting 30% off, head to the link in my description below, buyraycon.com/savvyopen. These earbuds have been so great for me as the fall weather makes me want to go on more and more walks outside, and the list of audiobooks I'm listening listening to right now just keeps growing longer and longer. With 8 hours of battery life and the ability to recharge in their case, I find these earbuds to be so convenient, and I've really been enjoying them. So if you're interested in getting 30% off on Raycon's Essential Open Earbuds, don't forget to click the link in my description below or go to buyraycon.com/savvyopen. Thank you to Raycon for sponsoring today's video. Now let's get into the details of our book review. The first chapter of All the Way to the River, or as I'll be calling it from now on, Cheat Gay Drugs, the first chapter is called A Visitation, and in this chapter, Elizabeth sees a vision of Rhea, who's her girlfriend who died 5 years ago. Rhea's ghost is visiting her, and the ghost is basically imploring Elizabeth to write this book. This chapter feels very much like she's trying to get ahead of the criticism, like she's saying, oh, you thought that maybe it was a little bit unethical of me to expose all of my girlfriend's darkest, weakest, most vulnerable moments when she was in the throes of cancer and drug addiction simultaneously. You thought maybe this book might be disrespectful to her living family members who don't all approve of me writing about her in this way, especially when she's not here anymore to defend herself. Well, don't worry, I actually got permission to do it from her ghost. She came back to visit me to tell me that she wanted me to write this book and publish it and have Oprah tell everyone to buy it so I could profit off of her trauma. She wanted that. Her ghost told me, and everyone knows ghosts don't lie. On page 5, here is how Elizabeth transcribes what the ghost of Rhea said to her. You have everything you need now. Stay on your path. You're on the right track. You found your God, and your God is fucking awesome. Your God is lit. Your community's got you covered, and you never need to be degraded by dependency of any kind ever again. You're really gonna shine now. It's your time. Your God is fucking awesome. Your God is lit. God is lit. I'm sure the ghost of a woman who died in 2018 at age 56 said, your God is lit. Also, what is it with self-help authors claiming that the ghosts of their dead loved ones are coming back to encourage them and give them the perfect advice to fit into a self-help book that they were already planning to write and sell for money? Didn't that also happen in The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck? I reviewed that book so long ago, but I sort of remember that happening there too. Are self-help authors really hallucinating ghosts, or do they just think that their audiences are the type of people who would believe that excuse and then accept that, like, of course they're being respectful to the dead person they're talking about because their ghost literally asked for it? Like, it's wild. Do they think their audience really believes that? Do they really believe that? I don't know. While the ghost is visiting Elizabeth, she's frantically writing in a journal, trying to take down everything Ghost Rhea is telling her. On page 8, she says, then the pen died, and Rhea was gone, as though sucked through an airplane door at 600 miles an hour. She always did know how to make a dramatic exit. And then I got to work. This book, with its stories, prayers, poems, journal entries, photos, and drawings, is my very best effort to tell the truth about what happened between me and Rhea Elias. So yeah, seeing the ghost of Rhea inspired Elizabeth to write this book. I think it's kind of weird how she never seemed to see any ghosts before she started doing drugs, but Elizabeth would probably argue that that's because she became more spiritual, so who knows? Now, I do want to say, there are lots of parts in this book that work pretty well as a memoir. The writing, even though it's really cringe at points, and we're gonna get into that and roast it, it is definitely interesting and engaging. She does have a way of keeping your attention as a reader. She does have a way of writing things in a way that's like dramatic and exciting, and you want to keep reading and turning the pages. So it is effective in that way. There are times when I was legitimately impressed with Elizabeth's ability to critique herself and explain what she learned from her own discovery, from her previously flawed worldview. We're gonna get into some of those parts, like minor credit where it's due. My point is, I like when memoirs include lots of self-reflection on the part of the narrator, when the narrator isn't afraid to make themselves look bad. A good memoir involves showing how you, the author, as the main character of the memoir, learned from your mistakes and broke down your own worldview in order to learn how to be better or overcome some challenge. That's generally in the makings of the good plot of a memoir. That's why I get very frustrated with a lot of these celebrity memoirs where they don't want to admit fault ever. They just want to tell you, like, straight up, this is what happened, and they never want to portray themselves as someone who needs to critique their own way of being, because that's less effective as a memoir, as an art form where you see a dynamic character, which is you, the writer, yourself as a dynamic character who undergoes a major shift throughout the story. That's much more interesting. But there is a difference between a memoir and a self-help book. As a memoir about Elizabeth realizing her own issues, overcoming her own setbacks, reflecting on her own flawed and occasionally legitimately evil behavior, that does provide a certain level of artistic value for readers trying to learn from the experience experiences of others. Elizabeth can kind of be an anti-hero where she causes all of her own problems. As the main character of the memoir, she can kind of be her own antagonist in that way. The issue is when it crosses that line from the genre of memoir into the genre of self-help. When it tries to teach advice to others, that's when I start to side-eye this book. A book that breaks down the narrator's own flaws and provides a brutally honest window into the narrator's worst, lowest moments as a human, that can be helpful in helping us as readers, as flawed humans ourselves, reflect on when we might behave selfishly in some ways. We can unpack where that behavior might come from, but only as we engage with it through the author's story. A self-help book, on the other hand, presents advice as if the author has overcome it so well that they're now an authority on the topic. We, the readers, are not just meant to learn from their mistakes by examining, Elizabeth's perspective compared to your own, but rather we're supposed to look at what a messy, dramatic, chaotic of a disaster of a person she was a couple years ago, but also completely trust her to give us advice, because this time she definitely has the answer, you guys. This time she's not like that anymore. On page 9, this book starts to establish itself within the self-help genre, and that's where I realized that there is going to be a lot of room for criticism in this book and what it says. So on page 9, Elizabeth says, "But this book is not only for people whose lives have been negatively impacted by their own addictions or by the addictions of others, though I do believe those two categories will include pretty much all of us at some time or another. This book is also about the many ways that people, despite their best efforts at living sane and stable lives, can sometimes get swept into high-octane dramas and traumas, finding themselves washed up on shores that can feel very distant from their true natures." A memoir doesn't need to tell us who this book is for or how it's going to help us. A memoir is a piece of narrative journalism. It tells the author's life story, flaws and all, as a narrative. The author is a dynamic character who undergoes growth, and we watch their own development within the memoir. These moments where she talks about who this book is for and how we're going to relate to the ways that she unpacks her difficulties with addiction and trauma, that suddenly shifts the focus to a conversation with the reader, indicating she's hoping to impart some wisdom to us. And Elizabeth, girl, I don't want your wisdom. I don't trust that you have any such wisdom. You're gonna see Elizabeth is the last person anyone should be taking life advice from. In the beginning of the book, we meet the Elizabeth of the early 2000s. She's a writer, and before Eat, Pray, Love comes out as this big hit, she meets a hairdresser named Rhea Elias. Rhea is a hairdresser, but she's also an artist. She's also primarily a musician. She likes recording music, but her music career hasn't taken off, so her main job is cutting hair. She learns about Rhea's past, how she was born in Syria and then moved to Detroit as a child, and then how she grew up in the Detroit punk scene in the 80s and 90s, and then how Rhea gets addicted to heroin, she gets addicted to cocaine, she does lots of drugs, and I think she gets hepatitis C, like a bunch of stuff goes on. Rhea's been through it. But Rhea is now a former addict. She's been clean from drugs for a while, and she regularly goes to addiction meetings. She works on staying sober. She has like a sober group of friends that she uses as her community, so Rhea is now sober after a long time of addiction. Elizabeth is instantly drawn to how cool Rhea is, and at this point, Elizabeth hasn't yet realized that she's not straight, so she doesn't right away recognize this feeling of admiration she has for Rhea as romantic attraction or sexual attraction. She doesn't really make that connection just yet. Actually, it's kind of weird. Elizabeth never really examines her sexual orientation in this book. She just kind of passively assumes she's straight for most of the book, and then one day, even as she's falling in love with Rhea, she still doesn't question it. And then one day Rhea is like, if Liz weren't straight, we'd be dating. And then Elizabeth just responds like, well, actually, that's not the reason. We would be dating, except that I don't want to cheat on my husband or something like that. She's like, I'm trying to be faithful in my marriage for once. So it has nothing to do with whether or not I'm straight. And that's like the only acknowledgement we get of Elizabeth even thinking about her sexual orientation. And I know the moment of like discovering your sexual orientation isn't always going to be that big of a deal for everyone. Some people just have it as this thing in their back of their mind that they just passively accept. But for a memoir where you're supposed to be diving deep into all of the feelings and all of the self-discoveries that Elizabeth is having, it's kind of weird that she never grapples with it beyond that. Like, the fact that Rhea is a woman and this is her first lesbian relationship it's like completely irrelevant. I don't think it's ever once mentioned even in the story. And on the one hand, that's fine. Like, I think we should treat all relationships equally regardless of gender, but on the other hand, it's 2025 and that is not how the majority of the world views queer people right now. So it does come across as a huge missed opportunity, but I digress. All right, back to the beginning of the book. So Elizabeth is obsessed with her cool hairdresser, Rhea, in the year 2000, and then in the background, we get all the eat, pray, love stuff that's going on. Elizabeth realizes she doesn't want to have kids, but her husband does, so she divorces him, then goes on a trip around the world where she learns about Eastern religions and eats lots of food, and then falls in love with a different man that she meets on this trip who's from Brazil, and then she marries him. Although, in this book, the only thing Elizabeth says about the reason her first marriage failed is that she didn't want kids, but her husband did want kids, which of course is a valid reason for a marriage not to work out. But then I've also seen articles that she's written where she talks about how the reason it didn't work out is that she refused to stop cheating, and that she would just cheat all the time and couldn't stop seducing other married men and things like that. So I don't know. I don't know why she didn't address, like, she's like, I'm so brutally honest in this book, but then she completely neglects the fact that she has publicly written before about how much she used to love to cheat all the time. So I'm a little confused. It doesn't seem like she's getting as self-reflective as she could if she doesn't even acknowledge that huge thing from 20 years ago, but okay. After she writes the book Eat, Pray, Love and it takes off, Elizabeth is suddenly full of big money, she's got cash for days, and because, as Elizabeth explains during her moments of self-reflection in this book, she was always battling codependence and having this deep emotional need to be validated by others, so she decided to start giving all of that money away. And like, on the surface, that's a pretty good idea. Giving your money away to other people who need it more is good, actually. But Elizabeth examines how, though it was subconscious, as like she had not yet realized she had these problems, when she gave away this money, it was conditional. She was expecting friendship, devotion, admiration, love. She was expecting something in return from the other person while pretending that it was a benevolent act. She wasn't like altruistic out of her desire to watch society improve. She was instead altruistic because she wanted to gain fast access to more people's love and gratitude. And she parallels that with the way she's been prone to flirting with a lot of people and engaging in lots of, impulsive sexual relationships because it's a fast way for her, especially as a woman, to get validation and attention. And to be honest, I thought that this parallel and this discussion was really interesting. I thought it was a great way to unpack the pressures that the world places on women and the emphasis that like society at large places on money and on women's bodies, and views both of these concepts as something we can commodify in exchange for positive human interaction. I thought that's like a super interesting conflict to examine. The problem is that Elizabeth does not actually have the self-reflection skills necessary to take this discussion, for lack of a better term, all the way to the river. She stops short. She never comes to the conclusion of, I should never have written Eat, Pray, Love in the first place. I should have never made tons of money off of a book inspiring other people in the first place because I am now realizing that I actually had it wrong back then and I was still too naive to know it. So now is the time to actually expose the predatory nature of the self-help industry and take accountability for my participation in it. Now that would have been a fantastic direction for this book to go. But I think Elizabeth's still too emotionally close to that version of herself to dissect it the way it really needs dissecting. So she retreats into the comfort of the self-help industry that she already knows. On page 48, she starts a chapter called Or Perhaps We Can See It This Way, which starts with the line, "What if Earth is nothing but a school for souls?" And then we're treated to more of Elizabeth's spiritual musings, more of the answers she's found on this journey, answers that I never asked for because I don't trust her. On page 49, she says, "What if everything in Earth School is working exactly the way it's supposed to be working? In other words, by teaching us things that we can learn in no other way. What if everything and everyone that we label as difficult or an obstacle or even dysfunctional is in fact a deliberately designed construct meant to awaken our true natures, a divine crowbar, you might say, that is sent by the cosmos to knock down the doors of our ignorance, demolish our illusions, and give us the opportunity to move past our fears, find our innate courage, propagate wisdom, and help us to remember that we are of God. What if bad things aren't happening to me, but rather bad things are happening for me?" I can't believe we're back to this! Remember, this is for the old school Savvy Writes Books viewers, alright? Remember how a few years ago on this channel, I used to say, what if we took the average of things happening to you and things happening for you, and instead Let's say things happen 3U. This book, for all of its flowery language and competent writing on a sentence level, is still deep down operating at that level of emotional intelligence, and that is such a disappointment. On page 73, Elizabeth is talking about the differences in perception of her public life versus her private life versus her secret life, and here is how she describes it. That was my public life, and it looked good. As for my private life, it was good. Out of respect for my ex-husband, a man whom I still care about and admire dearly, I will share nothing further in these pages about him other to say that we were always good to each other, that we loved each other, and that we are still kind to each other. But I had a secret life too, and in my secret life I wasn't doing so hot. And listen, I worked hard to be happy back then and to keep my head above water. Gratitude lists and exercise, self-help books and personal growth programs and quality time with loved ones, staying out of trouble and living an exemplary life, seeking professional help and therapies of all kinds when I needed extra support. But I also drank every day. So you're straight up admitting that self-help books don't work, and yet you're writing a self-help book that you think is going to work because this time you have the answer and it's God and 12-step programs? Elizabeth. So I'm over here like, okay, cool. On the one hand, yes, it is interesting to explore the ways that your public life and your secret inner life are different, to break down the ways that we might present different versions of ourselves to the public versus what we're truly feeling inside. But what's missing from this is the fact that Elizabeth is not just the average person going through introspection for the first time ever. She is already a respected self-help author. She was already doing huge book tours and giving talks all over the country about self-empowerment and finding yourself and spirituality, and here she is admitting that she was putting on that front for the public this entire time, that it was never real. You can't go through your first introspection about your public versus private self after you've already spent 2 decades charging people money based on a public version of yourself that you promised them was authentic. That's what we call a scam. And maybe Elizabeth regrets scamming her audience in this way, but if she does, she sure never admits it. In fact, her audience, the people who trusted her, any acknowledgement of the concept of her audience is shockingly absent from this entire book. It's like she doesn't even care about her readers, who are the people that allowed her to make all that fuck you money in the first place. So this book overall is about Elizabeth's journey of learning that she's been struggling with codependency and sex addiction, and that it all stems from this deep desire she has for external validation. And like, I kind of get that. I think that's an interesting thing to write about. I personally used to have a lot of problems with feeling like I was getting borderline legitimately addicted to attention. And I think in part that was because like I've now been on YouTube for almost 7 years, and I think the first couple years on YouTube made that worse because like I was getting attention on a large scale for the first time in my life, and I didn't know how to handle these dopamine overdoses that it was constantly giving me as an extrovert. So again, I think that's an interesting concept to explore. We really don't get a ton of stories from people who are honest and reflective enough to open up about what that type of mental addiction feels like and how it impacts their own thoughts and behaviors. And I think it is interesting to see someone break down what that's like and admit that she legitimately did have a problem with that made her behave as a terrible person. So I did enjoy learning about how Elizabeth learned to identify those patterns of behavior in herself and how she worked on getting over those things and unpacking what it means. The problem is she had to go and turn it into advice for other people. This book could have been a great memoir about a flawed, somewhat unreliable, morally gray protagonist who readers can see some of the worst pieces of themselves in, and that could lead to these really excellent in-depth book club discussions. But she just had to turn it into a self-help book. She couldn't help herself. She just had to keep pretending she has all the answers, even after straight up admitting to us that she falsely presented herself as having all the answers in the past, which just makes me go, why should I trust you this time? What if you're just lying again? So on the next page, page 74, she says, I took refuge in my work, my friends, my marriage, my garden. I tried to help everyone out. I kept giving and giving and giving. So many good things happening all around me. So many good things being created through me. Still, the feeling of not okay persisted. Where is God in this story, my sponsor might ask me today, if I were to report such a batch of unsettled feelings? Well, that would be an extremely good question. I could not have told you where God had gone. The loving deity whose compassionate voice I'd first heard on the bathroom floor during my divorce seemed very far away during those flush and shiny post-Eat, Pray, Love years. The spiritual practices I had studied with such discipline at the ashram in India had long been neglected as I'd returned to my old habit of trying to control the world in order to feel safe within it. Yoga had been replaced by going to the gym. Meditation had been replaced by hard work and good deeds. A search for divinity had been replaced by constant overachieving and a nonstop hustle for approval. Another way to say it is this: I had taken life back into my own hands. This is the exact opposite of spiritual surrender, and it will tire a body out. I'm saying this as a white woman myself, but this is like the most white woman parentheses derogatory interpretation of Eastern spiritual practices I've ever heard. What the fuck? Elizabeth, why are you the authority on whether or not spiritual surrender is the solution? Why should I trust you when you say that you learned God is necessary? Because for me, you know what actually helped me when I was getting over my addiction to attention and validation that I was starting to develop over the past few years? You know what helped me? Psychedelics. They didn't help you, and that's fine, but my point is we don't all need Jesus. Some of us just need drugs. And like, disclaimer, I just want, when I talk about drugs, when I'm saying this here, I'm not talking about heroin, cocaine, addictive drugs like that can make you like overdose and die. I'm talking about drugs as in the like food and drug, like pharmaceutical sense, drugs that are proven to help with your mental health. That's my biggest like crunchy hippie belief that I have, that psychedelic mushrooms are a legitimate mental health treatment. Lots of studies agree with me on this, but also again, I'm not a doctor. Disclaimer, don't come to me for medical advice, please. I'm not going to write a self-help book telling you to take shrooms. I'm just telling you what works for me personally, and it's not God. I used to be Catholic. I tried God. God didn't work. Then I ate some mushrooms. Those worked. You know what I'm saying? It's going to be different for everyone. So at this point, Elizabeth is rich as hell from the eat, pray, love craze. And because she thrives on external validation, she's giving that money away to everyone. And she decides to give a bunch of money to Rhea. She buys Rhea a whole ass house. And when Rhea's like, do I need to pay rent on this? Elizabeth's like, no, you just need to write a memoir and I'll send it to my publisher so you can be a successful author like me. Keep in mind that Rhea's artistic dream, at least according to Elizabeth, is to be a musician, not to be an author. So I'm confused about this. Like, Elizabeth, you bought her a house and told her that in order to live in it, she has to write a book, and you're going to get that book published for her so that she can enter the same career as you. That doesn't sound like love, Liz. That sounds like control. She details this on pages 98 to 99. She was fresh off a divorce. Her finances had taken a hit, and she had been living in a tiny studio apartment that literally faced a brick wall. She was almost 50, and her body was battered from a lifetime of drug addiction, street living, and hepatitis C. It was getting harder for her to stay on her feet all day cutting hair, and she always felt like she was failing as an artist. Now here comes someone offering her the chance to be a creator at last and to take nearly a year off from work. Here comes someone offering friendship, community, and access to a glamorous life. Here comes someone who thinks you're awesome and tells you so all the time. Here comes someone offering a beautiful place to live, creative encouragement, insider access to the New York publishing world, and perhaps even the prospect of fame and success. Success! Something Rhea had longed for so deeply that she had the word tattooed on her arm in Arabic. Here comes someone saying, your story is valuable, you are valuable. And it was true, Rhea's story was valuable, and she was valuable, but that's not why I was making the offer. I was making the offer because I already believed that I could not live without this person, and I didn't know any other means of ensuring that she wouldn't leave me but to produce a tempting package of promises and incentives that might, just might, get her to stay in my life a tiny bit longer, and that, as much as it hurts my heart to admit, is the truth. Okay, we need to unpack this a little. There is somewhat of self-awareness here. Like, the writing does its job to an extent. Elizabeth, through the tone in her writing here, is definitely framing it this way on purpose. She is intentionally painting Rhea as this marginalized person that she, Elizabeth, took advantage of. She is admitting that because she does want us to know, Elizabeth wants us to know that she was the villain in this case, that she was trying to be controlling and possessive of Rhea. I do think that there is a fair bit of self-reflection in this section because Elizabeth is intentionally portraying herself as the villain here. So that's good that's good writing from a memoir perspective. I'm not gonna say like, oh my God, does she not even realize how she comes across here? She does. She very intentionally realizes how she comes across here, and that is part of how she is trying to portray herself. She's openly portraying herself as a villain. That is good writing for a memoir. During Rhea and Liz's friendship, Rhea starts to relapse into addiction, but she hides it. She doesn't start doing heroin again, but she does start drinking alcohol again, which she was also sober from, and she does this by sneaking bottles of bitters that have some alcohol content in them as a way to get that fix, but still maintain plausible deniability. Elizabeth's conclusion about this is that Rhea also needs God. On page 137, she says, The thing is, though, Rhea already had a community filled with fellow recovering addicts who had loved her for years and who would have gladly received her admissions of shame and fear and helped her to process her overwhelming desire to drink. They could have guided her back to the principles of the program, back to the acts of service that kept us sober, back to the position of humility and surrender, but Rhea had pushed all those people away in order to chart her own path, and the last thing you ever want an addict doing is charting their own path. She had also pushed away the God of her understanding. In fact, during those heady years of success and secrets, we had both let drop any connection to an intelligence greater than our own, and addicts don't do well when they lose contact with a higher power, because then they start believing that their own demented thinking is the most supreme intelligence in the universe, and that's never a good idea. Elizabeth really tries to make this book religiously neutral by saying things like the God of her understanding. Throughout the book, she does reiterate that you don't have to surrender to the Christian vision of God or to a monotheistic deity, but you do have to surrender to some form of higher power, and I'm like, no, you don't. And again, to be clear, I know that spirituality and I know that religious communities can absolutely be helpful for people who are overcoming addiction. It seemed to be helpful in this case. Like, I'm not discounting that. That is great. If that works, do that. I'm just saying there isn't one and only tried and true way to overcome addiction. That doesn't exist. On page 143, Elizabeth explains how Rhea also scammed her audience by lying in her own memoir, which Elizabeth made her write. I want. There it is, the ferocious drumbeat of the ego pounding away within the blistering furnace of the self. But all that wanting did not keep Rhea from hiding and suffering, nor did it keep her from drinking. And even as her triumphant recovery memoir was being published in 2013 to rave reviews, and she started getting everything she'd always wanted, Rhea was writing in her journal, shit happens, life happens, and you adapt or change or get lost in the vacuum that becomes your dark reality. All the should-haves, could-haves, or wishes get sucked up into the high-priced melee that is your life. You start looking really good on the outside while your insides are rotting. Again, no consideration for the audience. Elizabeth doesn't seem to care that she pressured a recovering addict to write a memoir about overcoming addiction under the threat of homelessness should she not write it. Then the recovering addict wrote that memoir to help other people overcome addiction, even though she was lying because she was still in the addiction herself. And I'm just like, how do the readers of either of your books feel about this? Does anyone care about the readers? Have people completely forgotten that the entire reason books exist is for readers? Elizabeth probably has forgotten that, actually, because for all her talk about the 12-step program and her surrender to God and how she overcame her addiction to external validation, I don't really think that's true. I think she's still addicted to it. Because when you're a writer and you keep viewing the books that you write only in terms of how they impact you, the author, and don't stop to think even once about how any of this might make your readers feel, it sounds like you still are writing for the sake of receiving validation. You're writing for your own validation rather than to deliver something that readers are going to trust and legitimately find helpful. All right, then we get to the Instagram poetry. So throughout the book, in between some of the chapters, Elizabeth includes little poems. Some of them are longer than others, and some of them are more detailed and developed than others, but most of them are just like straight up Instagram girl boss poems, the things we saw on social media in the 2010s. The poems land somewhere on the Instagram poetry spectrum between Rupi Kaur and Gabby Hanna, kind of closer to the Gabby Hanna side if we're being honest. For example, on page 145, we have a poem called How to Surrender. Let's read it. For once in your life, let the butter cut the knife. Like, I mean, yeah, that's a poem technically. It has some poetic elements. You know, it rhymes. That's not necessary for poetry, of course, but it is a common literary device that poets use, and you can draw some messaging from it. Like, it's saying, you know, let the softer side take control. Let the part of you that's normally vulnerable be the one to dish it out this time. At least, I think that's what it's saying. I'm not really sure that's telling me how to surrender. So, I don't know, maybe this poem just actually sucks. On page 187, we get another Instagram poem, and this one is so fucking awful that I am not kidding. The title of the poem is literally longer than the poem itself. The title is, The Shortest Conversation I Ever Had with God. The poem is, Me. But why? God. Because is. Because is. Because is. Because is. Because is. One positive thing about these poems, though, they inspired me to try writing my own little Instagram poetry, so I wrote one for this video. I'm kind of proud of this one. Ready? This is my own little Instagram poem. I call it Y2K. We the people asked for Al Gore, but instead they gave us algorithms. Kind of proud of that poem. So Elizabeth goes on for a while like this, and then one day she learns that Rhea has been diagnosed with terminal cancer and given 6 months to live. So what does Elizabeth do about this? She immediately asks her husband for a divorce and then goes to Rhea and tells her she's been in love with her all along, and then Rhea is immediately like, hell yeah, and then they start having sex. There seems to be shockingly little consideration given to Elizabeth's husband here. This is the second marriage that she's just left on a whim. That's not supposed to keep happening, Elizabeth. But I guess Eat, Pray, Love taught her that blowing up marriages on a whim is normal and empowering girl boss behavior, actually, and I guess Rhea isn't worried that Elizabeth is going to just do the same thing to her because she's going to be dead in 6 months anyway. Elizabeth says in the book that the reason she doesn't go into detail about her ex-husband's reaction to the divorce and, how that went down is, out of respect for him and his privacy, because I guess her ex-husband is still alive and she can't just pretend that his ghost appeared and gave her permission to write whatever she wanted about him. Or maybe she knows that if she was honest about the way that went down, she'd just make herself look even worse. I don't know. But the husband that she just up and abandons one day is just completely written out of the story at this point. We never hear about him again. For all intents and purposes, Elizabeth seems to have completely forgotten that just yesterday she was in a decade-long marriage with somebody else. This woman literally never thinks about other people's feelings. Like, ever. Like, she never thinks about other people's feelings. And again, it would be one thing if she described this as her behavior at the time. This could have been a really good moment for memoir narrative style self-reflection. This could be part of her recovery and her spiritual journey, is realizing that she never thinks about other people's feelings and then reflecting on the way she treated her ex-husband and realizing that she made a mistake with how she just kind of threw him away. But she doesn't. She seems to legitimately just not care how this impacted him at all, that she's trying to sell this book as like the greatest love story of all time, when in reality it's just cheap gay drugs. Anyway, so Rhea's like, all right, I got 6 months to live. Based, now I can do drugs all day again. Rhea's family tries to get her to try chemo, but the doctors seem pretty confident that Rhea's going to die no matter what within like 6 months. And they said chemo might be able to extend her life by a few months, but it's gonna make her sick the whole time, so that decision's up to you. And the family was like, give it a try. And Rhea was like, well, I don't, if I have 6 months to live and I'm definitely going to die of this cancer anyway, I might as well just not do the treatment and have a really fun last 6 months of my life rather than be sick all the time. And that's her decision. If that's what she wants to do, that's totally fine. So Rhea and Elizabeth start taking every drug under the sun and fucking 24/7. That's all they do. Good for them. These bitches gay. Good for them. Good for them. The problem arises when Rhea ends up outliving her original 6-month prognosis, at which point the family and her doctors, they're all like, maybe you should actually try treatment because you seem to be handling this cancer better than expected. So eventually Rhea decides, okay, I'm gonna try treatment, but oops, she accidentally just got addicted to every single drug again. This could be a great time for Elizabeth to try to organize Rhea getting into some kind of rehab program and trying to overcome the addictions, but instead Elizabeth decides it's easier to just enable Rhea's drug problems and go buy her heroin needles and tie up her arms so that she can shoot heroin into her veins and all of that. She's like the worst enabler. So then Elizabeth starts struggling because Rhea's in a ton of pain from chemo all the time, and she's also addicted to hard drugs again, and as a result Rhea's kind of gone out of control. She's become abusive in their relationship. She's constantly yelling at Elizabeth. She's throwing things, she's turning everything into a fight, and Elizabeth then tries to organize an intervention, but that doesn't go well, so nothing she tries works. I'm thinking, this might have been a great time to reach out to some medical professionals, maybe try getting Rhea into an inpatient program, maybe use some of that fuck you money that you have to hire a full-time nurse to come and help her through this transition of getting off of these drugs again. But instead, Elizabeth makes the plan to end Rhea's life. That's her new plan. Let's go to page 206. It was in July of 2017 that I came up with a really good idea for what would save me from the nightmare I was now trapped in with Rhea. I would end her life. I'm not talking here about euthanasia or the arguably courageous act of helping someone who is in great suffering to have a death with dignity. Rhea at this point did not want to die, and she no longer gave a shit about her dignity. All she wanted to do was consume as much cocaine, alcohol, prescription drugs, and cigarettes as she could get her hands on, to monologue about how amazing and powerful she was for defying all the doctor's prognoses about her expiration date, never once acknowledging that perhaps the reason she was living so long was because I was taking care of her every need, to constantly find creative new places to hide her drugs from the cops who she had become certain were spying on us, to send text messages at all hours to the sweet-faced East Village teenagers who were bringing the cocaine right to our door, to doze off while smoking cigarettes in bed until
the sheets and pillowcases smoldered from her dropping embers, to pick hallucinated worms and bugs off her hot itching skin, and to tell me what a total fucking failure I was as a human being for not taking better care of her, and because she would not sleep, I could not sleep.
I see why her family didn't want you writing this. This is disgusting. What the fuck? What the fuck, Elizabeth? You got her into this situation in the first place. Why are you roping teenage drug dealers? Has Elizabeth ever once thought about anyone else's feelings? No, we're going to see as we get to the end. So on pages 210 to 211, she elaborates on this. I won't read it, but basically she elaborates on the fact that, like, she's not just saying that this was an intrusive thought that had crossed her mind. She had a plan in place. She had taken Rhea's drugs and was planning to switch her morphine and her sleeping pill so that Rhea would take the sleeping pill when she thought she was going to remain conscious. And then once Rhea was unconscious, Elizabeth had acquired a bunch of fentanyl patches that she was going to place all over her so that she would overdose in her sleep. And then it would look like Rhea had just overdosed on her own. But then Elizabeth gets home from planning this and Rhea's like, you better not be plotting against me, because she's paranoid all the time. And Elizabeth's like, how did she know? And then she abandons that idea, so she never actually attempts to do it. On page 214, right as Elizabeth's like, wow, I almost ended my girlfriend's life. What's wrong with me? The way she gets out of this is I'm not kidding, she hears the voice of God. Then I heard a voice in my head, a voice that pierced my confusion so cleanly and swiftly that it could only have come from God. How do I know it was the voice of God? Because I know the voice of God. I know the voice of God the way a blind, mewling, newborn kitten knows the smell of its mother. The voice said this: if you have arrived at a point in your life where you are seriously considering ending your life or that of another human being, there is a strong possibility that you have reached the end of your power. That being the case, continued the voice, perhaps it's time you called somebody and asked for help. You really needed the voice of God to tell you that? Okay. This woman is not okay. She's not okay. On page 249, Elizabeth has to take it back into self-help mode. She says, God gives the brightest students the toughest assignments, a sweet old lady had said to me in a 12-step meeting only weeks before, and I kind of wanted to punch her in the face for it at the time. But what if it was true? What if this apparent disaster was just my next Earth School assignment, specially curated for my own growth? What if Rhea was playing her role perfectly in our strange cosmic drama, volunteering to act out this horrible story in order to give me the chance to find my own strength? What if her final act of love was to hurt me so badly that I would be faced with the choice to either tank alongside her or be jolted into my next level of evolution? And what if my final act of love to her was to refuse to play into her manipulations? Girl, that paragraph smells like burnt toast, okay? Damn. Yeah, Elizabeth, you're right. What if God intentionally gave your girlfriend cancer and made her a drug addict just to teach you how to be more spiritual? You're the main character of the universe, of course. So other people's life or death struggles are, of course, all about you and what you can learn from them. What if your girlfriend's slow and painful death from cancer didn't happen to you, but for you? What if it happened through you? The self-obsession of this woman. I cannot. The self-obsession of this woman. So then Elizabeth dumps Rhea and leaves her homeless because the apartment they share is being sold, and Elizabeth gets her own place, and Rhea, who hasn't been able to work for like a year because she's dying of cancer, now she has no home. And Elizabeth has the audacity to end this chapter with another Instagram poem. Somebody around here needs to change, and your name is somebody. Wow. I'm 14 and this is deep. Rhea moves back in with one of her ex-girlfriends who she's kept contact with and maintained a friendship with all these years. Her ex-girlfriend helps her get sober again, and then once she's sober, she's like, wait, where did Elizabeth go? Because she has no memory of the past 6 months. Eventually, the ex-girlfriend reaches back out to Elizabeth, being like, Rhea's sober now, and then Elizabeth comes back into Rhea's life and fills her in on everything that happened. And she even tells Rhea, like, at one point I was plotting to end your life, and here's how Rhea responds to that on page 276. Are you mad at me? No, wait, dude, that's fucking awesome. That's amazing. I'm so proud of you. Now we were both laughing. Wait, why are you proud of me? Because you found your darkness, dude. Remember the first day I ever met you and all I could see was that light pouring out of you? It didn't make any sense to me that you were so bright and shiny. I remember thinking, this chick's gotta have a ton of darkness hidden somewhere deep down inside her if she has all that light. Like real darkness, like to balance out all that sunshine. You know what I mean? Because nobody is just one thing. I always wondered where you hid all your darkness, babe. I'm so proud of you that you discovered it. Will you really bring it forth in me? Rock on, Rhea said, and then she gave me a fist bump. Report this to r/that happened. And then everyone clapped. I was the fist bump. I guess Rhea and Elizabeth, if this is true, they really were a match made in heaven this entire time. Maybe they truly are the only people who can match each other's freak like this. But I'll tell you something. Neither of them are anyone I'd take life advice from ever. Later on, Rhea's health starts to decline more, and they realize it's getting toward the end, like it's her last few weeks of life. So Elizabeth and the ex-girlfriend decide that they're going to let Rhea drive for one last time. Rhea insisted on being the one to drive us to the mall, and heaven forgive us, we allowed her to do it, with me and Stacy both grabbing at the wheel from either the passenger seat or the back seat, telling her when to brake and shouting at her to veer out of the way of oncoming trucks. It was so stupid and risky of us to have allowed this, but we had to. It would be the last day she ever drove a car. She who had always loved to drive. Excuse me, what? No! No, what? No, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. People in this country, in the United States of America, people do not take driving seriously enough. Again, I'm just an annoying autistic Chicago hippie who rides lots of trains and doesn't own a car and drives like a couple times a decade, okay? But I firmly believe that people get way too willy-nilly with their driving. You are piloting a giant heavy box that has the capability to instantly crush a human life. That is a responsibility you need to take seriously. What if Rhea had always really wanted to fly a plane? Would you let her just fly a plane because she was about to die? No, of course not. Maybe you would. Maybe Elizabeth would. Who knows? No, don't let her drive a car while she's on all these medications and almost never knows where she is anymore. How many goddamn lives did you put in danger for that? That's unacceptable. She never thinks about anybody but herself. She doesn't even think about the hundreds of other people on the highway, because to Elizabeth, it would have hurt her personally more to feel bad about not letting her girlfriend drive one last time. How do you have that little consideration for anyone else around you? What? This is why I don't like to drive. This is why I don't have to drive. Jesus, this is unacceptable. I don't like to drive because I know there's people like Elizabeth out here saying, yeah, my girlfriend's on 1,000,000 cancer drugs. She's probably high on morphine right now, but I'm gonna let her drive to the mall. Then, I'm not even gonna read these out loud because they're so stupid. There is a chapter in this book where Elizabeth uses her spiritual powers to channel the ghost of Rhea's dead mother. It's so weird. But there will be times when Elizabeth will be like, I can feel the presence of Rhea's mother in the room. This is while Rhea's still alive. And then she will like channel the mother's spirit and have the spirit talk to Rhea through her. That's really weird, Elizabeth. Maybe Elizabeth played Ace Attorney and thought that should she ever end up on trial for all of these crimes, she could just channel the ghost of Mia Fey to represent her in court, like Maya does. After Rhea dies, Elizabeth realizes that she now has to start working on her own issues with codependence, which is true, you know. I want to be clear, it's good that she's making that change, it's good that she recognizes that. So she starts doing a 12-step program, and then on page 326 she gets the following advice. Stick with the women in the program and keep away from the men, at least for now. Stay in the middle of the herd and start working the steps, and listen for your higher power's voice when you hear other people sharing. You'll begin to hear direction for your own life in the stories that other people tell. Keep an open mind. It'll all start to make sense eventually. So that's what her sponsor tells us. Question, why is she supposed to stay away from the men? Elizabeth is in a program for recovering sex addicts, recovering love addicts, recovering codependents. So yeah, it would make sense that she should stay away from any potential sexual or romantic partners. But Elizabeth's last relationship, the one she just got out of, was with a woman, and it was probably the most toxic codependent relationship she ever had. So why does she think that staying away from the men in this program is going to help her? She could just easily fall into this pattern with a woman. In fact, she just did. Did she forget that just happened like yesterday? This is never addressed in the book. There isn't even any little tongue-in-cheek moment after this where Elizabeth thinks something like, ha, if only my sponsor knew that I could be even worse with women. Like, there's not even a moment like that. It's just treated as normal that, like, yeah, of course, I'll stay away from the men. The women pose no threat, even though I just did this all with a woman. Elizabeth is now straight again, I guess. This is Straight Girl's Guide to Sleeping with Chicks too. Eat hot chip and lie boogaloo. She literally prayed the gay away. No! Elizabeth literally found she prayed the gay. No! No, Elizabeth! On page 360, Elizabeth talks about the fact that she feels like she's recovered and made a lot of positive changes in her life. She says, 5 years into my recovery, the team of doctors and therapists and shamans whom I once employed to take care of my physical, mental, and spiritual health are all gone. The hormone replacement treatments and plant medicines that I used to consume are gone because their work is no longer needed here. The anti-anxiety pills and antidepressants and sleeping pills are gone. Alcohol is gone. The pouring of my time and treasure into other people in order to win their love, desire, approval is gone. I no longer volunteer to be the orderly in other people's internal mental hospitals, nor will I allow anyone to make me into their nurse or their purse. All right, Elizabeth, I'm glad you're recovering and shit, but like, do you really need to treat your prescription medications the same way you treat like drugs that you have to become sober from. Like, sure, if your psychiatric medicine or the medication that a doctor gives you doesn't work for you, you don't need to keep taking it. You can and should talk to your doctor and work with them to find a better solution. But when you're talking about sobriety and you lump in prescription drugs that you were given by a doctor in with getting clean from like alcohol and pseudoscience plant medicines and stuff, to claim you're not truly sober until you give up like your antidepressants, which are legitimate medication, that's extremely irresponsible from a medical perspective. God damn. Elizabeth's final Instagram poem in this book is from Rhea's perspective, and it's called After All This, Rhea Would Like to Respond. It's not clear if Rhea wrote the poem herself before she died, or if Elizabeth channeled her ghost to write this poem after her death, or if Elizabeth just wrote this poem herself and is pretending it's from Rhea's perspective. But the poem's all about how much she loves Elizabeth, and how much she loves it when Elizabeth writes about her. Just in case anyone had any doubts about the way that Elizabeth wrote this book about Rhea, in case anyone was worried it was exploitative in any way, don't worry. Rhea wrote a poem at the end to tell you that she loves it when Elizabeth writes about her. She loves it, actually. Again, like I said, I do think that a book that deals with how a toxic and tumultuous relationship taught a writer about her own issues with codependency, that can absolutely make a really great memoir. And like I said, great memoirs do show the darkest moments of their narrators. They show the writers as extremely flawed, often morally gray people, occasionally anti-heroes or even villains in their own life story. And that helps the reader connect to that and look at the different ways we might justify or rationalize our own perspectives when we're doing something that hurts someone else. That's a good thing to include in your writing. But all of this insertion of how God is the solution, Rhea's problem is she wasn't giving herself to God enough, God did this for her, not to her, all of that self-help bullshit completely delegitimizes the impact that this book could have had. Elizabeth should not be giving anyone advice right now. In fact, the only way I think this book could have worked is if Elizabeth's conclusion could be that she's in no place to coach other people through life ever again, and that she's realized that the entire self-help industry is a big old scam preying on vulnerable people, and that this era of self-discovery brought her to that point, and that she is complicit in that, and that she is making that conclusion that she realizes she's the villain. But she can't write about that because she hasn't actually had that discovery yet. She still thinks we want her advice. I'm really curious as to what you guys think about this book as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. I thought this book was absolutely unhinged, and I am like kind of terrified of Elizabeth Gilbert as a person right now. Before we end this video, I do want to give a quick update on the charity fundraisers that I've been running on my merch shop. So first of all, as you guys know, I have been running a sticker fundraiser. I made 6 different stickers with the original 6 American Girl dolls, each saying different things to oppose the Trump regime, like based on, and then they're based on their books. Like, it's based on the themes of their books. They're each saying something that relates to their story. I've been selling those stickers on my merch shop. That fundraiser absolutely blew up, you guys. At the time that I'm recording this, that fundraiser has brought in almost $10,000. Like, we were at like $9,700 the last time I counted. And in the previous video I put out a couple weeks ago, I mentioned that we had reached $5,000, and as a result, I gave $1,000 to 5 charities. I gave $1,000 to Planned Parenthood, to the Illinois ACLU, to World Central Kitchen, specifically to their fund for providing meals in Gaza, to Trans Lifeline, and to the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. I gave $1,000 to each of those charities, and now the fundraiser ends on October 31st, on Halloween. The last day of the month is the last day that those stickers will be for the fundraiser. And it looks like at the end of the month, I'm going to be able to give another 1,000 to each of those 5 charities. That is incredible. You guys, thank you so much. Like, legitimately, thank you. It's been really hard going through what the US is going through right now, and like trying to find a place where you feel like you want to do something that's helpful, and you're trying to, you know, build community and defend your community and work with other people around you to try to help. And there have been a lot of organizations that are really stepping up, so I've been trying to help with that, as well as like making some protest art to try to spread this message that I think is really important. So the fact that you guys all were so interested in the stickers and wanted to help with that really means a lot to me. Again, I've been mailing out more orders of stickers every day. It feels like some days I spend like an additional 8 hours on top of my work, you know, printing more stickers, cutting more stickers, packaging up more stickers. It really blew up, and I got hundreds of orders really fast. So that's all to say that if you have not received them yet, please know that they are coming. I really apologize for the delays, but I've been like trying to get them all done as fast as I can. The other fundraiser I started 2 weeks ago was, if you see, I've got this little Chicago bracelet on. I've been making bracelets that are Chicago themed, ones that say hands off Chicago and ones that just say Chicago with hearts around it. So I've made some of those. The first day I released that was 2 Fridays ago, and they sold out on the first day. So then I restocked them that Monday, and then they sold out on the first day again. So I'm sending those out. At the time that I'm filming this video, I haven't yet restocked them. I'll update on the screen whether or not there are any more available for that, but that will go until the end of the month as well. And 100% of profits from those bracelets are going to benefit Indivisible Chicago, because that is an organization that specifically in Chicago has been doing a lot of work to help build community surrounding fighting back against these ICE invasions. And they've been doing a lot of great work to distribute like free hands off Chicago signs that people have been putting in their businesses, and like free signs so that local businesses can make it clear that ICE is not welcome there. They've been organizing like community efforts to help alert each other and to help with people like patrolling like school drop-off zones to help alert each other if they see ICE vehicles or anything like that. So it's been really nice to see this organization really stepping up and trying to help everyday Chicagoans find ways to help each other out and look out for each other. So my bracelet fundraiser, 100% of profits are going to benefit them so that they can keep doing this kind of work. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for all your help with everything and for supporting this channel and watching me. I will see you guys again next week. It's Halloween next week, and we're going to review the absolute horror show of Kash Patel's other children's books. So I'll see you on Halloween for that. But in the meantime, I hope you guys have a good weekend. Bye, friends!